that note.
I'm glad someone else thought I meant caffeinate. That's great. Yes, caffeinating is much difficult. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first writing roundtable, writing alternative relationships, polyam, queer-platonic, and more. I am so excited to be here today and to see all of you. And before we get into the actual panel, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. This panel is run by the Weeknight Writers Group, which is a social enterprise devoted to providing affordable and accessible community supports for writers. And it is hosted in partnership with Renaissance Press, which is a small publisher dedicated to publishing diverse voices. They are Canadian like me, and they are also just a lovely bunch of people. And it is thanks to them that we can have live captions on our Zoom. So do check them out. I will post a link in a couple of minutes. And for now, I'm going to get some introductions started. So I want folks for you to introduce yourself with what's your name, what genres do you write, and what types of alternative relationships can be found in your work. And we're going to start with Jade, who is actually my co-moderator today. We are going to be alternating asking questions. Jade, would you like to start?
Sure, I am Jade. I write mainly fantasy fiction, and alternative relationships in my work mostly revolve around ace type relationships, which I've been exploring for myself recently.
Awesome. Does anyone want to go next?
I can go next.
All right.
Hi, I'm Jean. I write mostly urban fantasy fiction, and I explore all kinds of different kind of relationships in my work. Like mostly, I've been doing a lot of like Jade said, a lot of works on with characters on the spectrum, and a lot of polyam relationships and a lot of queer-platonic relationships to see how those work. And it's been very fun.
Awesome. Sagan, do you want to go next?
Sure. I write romantic comedies, specifically polyamorous romantic comedies. So all of my books, I have the polyamorous passion series that I've written 7 books so far, and they all are focused on polyamorous relationships and open relationships.
For some reason, I thought you had 9 books.
There will be 9 books. Yes, I'm working on the 8th right now. I only have 7 published so far. There will be 9. And I'm working on a separate book right now that's kind of a spin-off from them. So that will be published next month.
Ooh, very exciting.
Cool. Yeah.
Aisha?
Hi, I was trying to wait until my little friend, there's a bird that is perched outside of my window. It's a mourning dove, which I think is very funny because I write a mix of fantasy and horror novels, a lot of gothics, but also a lot of contemporary fantasies. So very fitting that I will be joined by a mourning dove. But my name is Aisha Monet. I write, as I said, fantasy, gothic horror blends. My debut novel was a contemporary fantasy road trip comedy called The Black Veins. I often return to queer found family in my work. I love platonic queer relationships. I love exploring familial bonds between characters and sort of the chosen family element. And so those are probably specifically between queer characters. So those will probably be my wheelhouse of interest.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Rosie?
Hi, yeah, I'm Rosie Thor. I also dabble in found family and queer-platonic relationships, mostly in young adult science fiction and fantasy.
Awesome. And I just have to say, I love Rosie's book, Fire Becomes Her, and I'm very, very, very excited to chat about it today.
Oh, it's right here.
So pretty.
All right, Jade.
Okay, so the next question we're going to discuss is, how do you deal with the exploration and creation of boundaries in alternative relationship models? And who would like to take that one first? Anyone?
I can go.
All right, go ahead.
So for me in my work, I focus a lot on individual characters, and I don't really work from sort of standard relationship models. I feel like often in a lot of heteronormative storytelling, you have a very often traditionally gender focused idea of who should be the pursuer, who should be the receiver in a relationship, like what should one party be doing for another. Um, and there's almost these really archaic, like traditional heteronormative norms about like what people's boundaries should be, what people should enjoy receiving from a romantic partner, be it like attention or gifts, or there are like these ideas that like, oh, every woman loves this, every man loves this. And I think that is something that I really work really, really hard to break down in my stories. And I approach each of my characters as characters. And in terms of boundaries, that becomes even more specific because what might be a boundary for one person might not be a boundary for another. And what two characters' relationship might look like might not be what another group of people's relationship might be like. Um, and I think that that is something that I want to model in my fiction because it's something I feel really strongly about in real life as well. Wherein when you are entering any sort of relationship with a person, be it like platonic, be it romantic, or whatever it may be, you do have to meet that person where they're at, and you do have to express your boundaries and respect theirs. And it's really not safe to assume. So I like to also have that implemented in my novels and have my characters sort of chat and get to know each other and experience sort of what it's like to have each other in their lives and like what that means for their specific relationship. And it's also really fun to explore in fiction because like you can have some really fun scenes built out of that, you know? And yeah.
I love that. So just like taking it really individually.
Yeah.
Bouncing off of that, I totally agree. I think that the scenes that are my favorite to write, and I know that this goes against like some conventional wisdom of like what makes good pacing, but my favorite scene to write is when characters are just sitting together talking about themselves and talking about what they want. And those are consistently like the chapters in my books that I hear the most from readers about. They're always scenes where like nothing else is going on. They're just talking about what their queerness means to them, what type of relationship they want, and what that would look like for them in an ideal world. Oftentimes without meaning to talk to each other about it in a, I want this, do you also want this? Would you like this together kind of way? They're just like, gee, wouldn't it be nice? And the other character's like, yeah, gee, wouldn't it be nice? Too bad nobody else wants that. And, you know, they have to struggle through it still. But there is this element of like, why don't we just talk about what we want? Why don't we don't have to set boundaries in like a weird chess game kind of way. We can actually just set up what it is that we want, what it is that we don't want, and ask for that. And if we don't get it, that's just someone saying, oh, that's not the model that I want, and that's okay. So I think that a huge part of these types of relationships that maybe are, you know, we're saying that the alternative, non-traditional, but they are just like any other relationship where you have to talk about your needs and basically just have a conversation. And I think that that's one of my favorite scenes to write. It's also my favorite kind of scene to read. And I just think it's so nice and refreshing to have characters just sit down and talk about it.
There is power in non-flashy scenes because I feel like that is sometimes where we can see ourselves in the scene. I can make that small choice. I can decide I want my eggs a particular way. I may not be able to choose something a little bigger, but like, you know, it's powerful to see yourself in small moments.
And I would add to that, you know, so much of our existing media really revolves around the concept of miscommunication, and especially romantic miscommunication. And so it's also just refreshing to see scenes where people are actually laying out their boundaries. It's so different that even if it is a quieter scene, it still feels like a big deal because we just haven't had a lot of that in our culture.
Characters displaying active listening is very sexy.
It is. Like, because I keep hearing like, you know, oh, consent is sexy. And as an ace person, I'm like, yeah, but it's also like, it's just a basic part of being a person, you know.
Absolutely.
Like, okay, to use like my work in progress as an example. So I have a main character who's like who had a queer platonic relationship with like the person that she was arranged married to, and is actually like romantically in love with her best friend who she's not married to. And she and her spouse have like this understanding, like they're best friends, and they're in like this like long political game together, you know what I mean, until like until they get older and they can like sort of like run away from their like obtrusive families. But then something happens and, you know, plot happens. And it's just like a fun thing to explore. Also, I also have like a lot of like disabled and like neurodivergent people in my work. And it's just like because I have a lot of disabled and neurodivergent people in my life who are also queer. And it's just it's like fun to like explore like, you know, like these like relationship like expectations and like breaking them down is kind of fun, because like I have a deaf character who's also like is like I'm selectively mute sometimes. So, but he's like just one of the snarkiest people, and it's fun to like display that through like his like his gestures and the inside jokes he has with like his loved ones. It's great. So yeah, you know, just
That sounds wonderful.
be aware. Yes.
Yeah. And Sagan.
Yeah, I find that it's a lot of fun to play with kind of the assumptions and the expectations around the relationships. I definitely find that with my novels, because of the way that I've written them, it's about these three best friends who all discover polyamory in their own ways throughout the course of these 9 books. And because of that, there is like, they will actually outline boundaries. Like, they will be in a relationship and they will like write down, okay, so this is what we're going to do. And like, this is how we're going to change the nature of our relationship and all that kind of thing. And I also find it really fun to kind of like flip things around, so that if there's often going to be, you know, miscommunication or assumptions that one character has that another doesn't. And so it'll be one situation where, you know, a character assumes something about monogamy or exclusivity, and then the other character's like, oh, we never had a conversation about that though. So like, why would that be an automatic assumption? So it's fun to play with those types of things and flip them around from what we, you know, normally kind of experience in society, and having some of my characters where their default is just polyamory and they're like really confused by the idea of monogamy.
Yeah,
Very
for
cool.
sure.
That's me. I'm confused by monogamy.
I'm confused by a lot of things.
All right. Our next question is, how does writing alternative relationships affect the way in which you construct your setting and or frame the in-story relationship between the level of support the alternatively romantic characters have with the society they live in, or possibly lack thereof?
The alternative relationships in my story is like because like there isn't really like a sort of like a racial or gender divide in my stories. There's often like a class divide, or like a or a disability divide or something like that. And so in like having that, in like, you know, having this like, you know, be like seen as like a neutral thing in a story, like alternative relationships might seem like a privilege to some, like in my story, like it's like an inside joke that the queen has like a billion mistresses. She's had like many, like she was known as sort of being like a player, like, so like you know, which is like, it's a plot point, so it's not spoiling. And so like she's had a lot of kids, and she's like been able to like I take from like a lot of like period dramas and like actual history, like, you know, like I'm saying this kid is mine, everything like that. And so, you know, like, and everything like that. And but like that's seen as a privilege because she's a rich person, and so she can provide for her like like 15 children and like a bunch of like her wives and mistresses and things like that. But that's not like a common thing for people. So it's just it's just interesting to play around with. So it's just like go back to your world building notes and see what you can do with it.
I think in terms of, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
Okay, I was gonna say, in terms of my work, I am a sucker for the power friendship trope. I love, 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 love the power friendship trope. And so for me, I tend to explore stories where the characters are in a world where their relationships are, if not, they are even in the terms of the world non-traditional, but that is their power. And that is what makes them so unique. And that is what gives them such a edge over the competition, so to say. Even in the Black Veins, the entire point is that Blith is going on this road trip to save her kidnapped family. And it is not something she could accomplish by herself, but because she manages to build this found family of extremely talented, strange, wacky, and amazing friends, she manages to get to Electric City, save her family, and I won't spoil the rest. But like, you know, she does manage to like do what she sets out to do, and she manages to do it quite well against the odds of every expectation that everyone else in this world had. And so for me, I really, really get a big kick out of like that feeling of being like, yes, there is such a unique power in alternative relationships. There's such a unique power in, if you feel that you should value your friends over romantic relationships, or you feel like platonic relationships mean the most to you, then follow that. You can. That's a beautiful thing. It's a unique thing, yes, but there's also power in that. Or if you feel that you are romantically attracted to more than one person, follow that. That is a unique feeling that is inherent to you, and it is beautiful, and that is beautiful in and of itself. Like, I don't necessarily think that just because something is, this is the Aquarius in me speaking, I'm about to say the most Aquarius thing I've ever said, but just because something is alternative or against the grain, it does not make it bad. Sometimes, in my opinion, it makes it better. So that is something I often return to in my works. I do love that feeling of being like, yeah, my characters are different and they're amazing.
Hear, hear.
As an Aquarius moon, I totally agree.
See, you get it.
As a Cancer, it's all about love.
Yeah.
I'm like, I love being unique. It's my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think in terms of like world building and creating scaffolding for these types of relationships, I have often in most of my work looked at worlds in which those types of relationships are not the norm, and because that is what I have experienced in my life, and the easiest way for me to come at it is from a place of experience. And I have often written worlds in which those are not that those are not the norm, and are not necessarily models or identities that the characters themselves know about. I am also, oh, my cat is attacking my chair. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no.
I told you she would make an appearance.
No.
But yeah, I have often come at it from a perspective of identity and discovery. And for me, that's I think something that is most likely because I write a lot of young adult, and that's something that those characters are going through in that moment in their lives. But I actually, now that you've asked this question, I'm now immediately like, why do I do that? Oh my gosh, I should write a book where it's the norm now. So my brain is spinning, and maybe my next book that will be like queer platonic relationships will be like baked into the world building as like a thing that everybody has. Or everyone has the opportunity to have. I don't know, but it is something that I'm thinking about now, as I don't know that I have seen a lot of fiction where that is normalized. I think I've seen it a lot more with polyamorous relationships. I've seen a few like different fantasy worlds where that has become the norm. But yeah, I'm very interested to see more of that. This is my cat Jane. She has joined the Zoom.
Aw, cutie.
She has nothing to say about queer platonic relationships. She has
Well, we
only
don't know
things to
that.
say.
Let him speak.
She only
Yeah,
has things to
exactly.
say about
Let him
anger and about how I should feed her. So
They generally do.
Yeah, those are the
Strong
standard
opinions.
cat topics. But yeah, Rosie, I really appreciate that. And I feel kind of similarly in my own world, like the world that I'm currently writing in, the primary kingdom is something that I've carried with me since I was a child. And like, since long before I had like a concept that you could have a queer normative world or a world where queer platonic partners were a thing. Hell, before I even knew the term queer platonic partners. And so, you know, in that main kingdom, there really isn't much of that. There is, you know, some acceptance of like gay relationships, but there's not really any discussion of anything beyond that. And something I'm really looking forward to in later books that I'm working on is exploring other countries within this world where I have an opportunity to build in those dynamics that I just didn't think to include in a world that I started working in when I was, 14. Sagan.
For me, it's interesting because like this is the reason why I decided to write contemporary novels and to do it through the romantic comedy sort of lens is because I really wanted to see like what does polyamory look like and open relationships look like in our society and in our world, and then to be able to have that kind of reflected for readers to kind of see, oh, here's how I can actually like live this right now in this moment. So it's been interesting to kind of explore normalizing open relationships in that, and to also shift with it depending on the different characters, because they do all have sort of different backgrounds and lifestyle goals and that kind of thing. So for some of them, they do have family members who aren't super accepting. And for others of them, they're just like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like, I don't really care that you're have an open relationship. Like, why is this even a big thing, right? So it kind of like exploring all of those different options and really sort of seeing how that can kind of fit into a variety of different sort of lifestyles and again, like different approaches to take for your own sort of personal life.
Awesome. Before I pass the mic back to Jade, I just want to let everyone know that we will have time for audience questions. So if you want to ask a question, please leave it in the chat. Audience members aren't allowed to stream video or audio just because that makes sure that we can record it without infringing anyone's privacy, so we can later post it to YouTube. So please do leave your questions in the chat. And Jade, if you have anything to add to that, and then it's your question next.
I just want to say I really relate to Rosie's thoughts on I have a world that I've been carrying around for a while, but when I started writing it again, I didn't have the background or the depth of experience to think about, well, what if I made, this type of relationship normative? And the nice thing is I didn't get published right away. So I had time to go back and rewrite some of that. And instead of making it normative for the world, I have made it normative for one sort of isolated world. And there's some genetic reasons why and a few other things, but I did want to have one section of the world where I could explore it in a normative way, even if the rest of the world didn't. So it's fun to play with a world where you can have places where both are possible, and then it's possible to compare them within world too, which I enjoy myself personally. That's my last thoughts on that. And for our next question, what level of awareness is it important to have when thinking about writing alternative relationships? Things like harmful tropes to avoid, poor representation traps, or good trusted places that we can go to check info or questions about types of alternate relationships that we're less familiar with. Anyone want to go first on that one?
I can start.
All right.
One of the things that I always find is useful to sort of ask yourself in these sorts of situations when you are writing it is, how would I approach this if it was more, mainstream or socially acceptable type of relationship? And then comparing that to how was I starting to approach this, and where are those sorts of discrepancies? How am I treating this differently for no reason other than
Like
the fact.
curiosity versus judgment.
Yeah, exactly. And really looking at, why do I think that I need to write about, XYZ solely because it is an alternative relationship? Like, for what purpose do I feel like it's necessary to use a particular trope and that kind of thing? And, I think it's also really important when we are exploring potentially negative sort of stereotypes or negative kind of tropes to look at it as, again, what is the purpose of this and why do I want to be using it? I don't think it's necessarily like a bad thing to use them, but are we using it as an opportunity to reflect on, here's why this is kind of problematic, or like, are we approaching it from that sort of like judgmental space, or is it providing more opportunity for more of a dialogue to come out of this? And so sort of like flipping that around and helping kind of even the characters, if they have these kind of internalized ideas, to then show them exploring all of the different options and starting to, change their perspective on things and starting to learn new things and that kind of thing.
I like that.
My answer would be sensitivity readers. Just like asking someone who has lived experience or has like an identity that like coincides with alternative relationships, and asking them asking them like, is this harmful? Is this right? What should I be avoiding? What should I be mindful of? Been really helpful. And just looking up the different stereotypes and like harmful tropes that are within like the environment, and seeing what to avoid in your own writing. That's been really helpful. A quick example that comes up. So like, there's a show called Adventure Zone. It's like a D&D podcast, and like one of the character, like the writer for that show, he accidentally wrote the bury your gays trope with a gay couple in the show, and a lot of like, he listened to audience reaction, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know this was a trope. I am so sorry, you guys." And so for every gay character that ever came up later, any other queer characters that came up later, he's been very mindful and like very open, which I find very endearing. So yeah, just you just don't know. So if you don't know, just ask somebody.
Absolutely. And I would add to that you can often even just like paying attention to what people of various identities are saying on social media, in reviews of other content, stuff that you're not writing, can really help you get some perspective before you get to the point of having a sensitivity reader, so that you have some awareness going in. And also, it's just never a bad idea to like actively go and research popular tropes. You can literally just type tropes and then the type of relationship or identity that you're looking in and search for that. And you can learn a lot that way before you get to the sensitivity reader point, so that hopefully there is less work to do when you actually do have the sensitivity reader on board.
My thoughts on it are similar to my thoughts about whenever you want to write anything new, which is to immerse yourself in the community that is already there and has already been doing the work in that space. I remember vividly when I decided to start writing horror novels, and I immersed myself deeply in the horror community, and I was listening to what people were saying, what they were reading, what their thoughts and opinions were. And I think before you can try to become a new voice in a space, you have to listen to the voices that are already speaking. And so I'd say, one, like, if you're here and this is something you're interested in doing, you're already off to a good start because you are listening to people who are already writing about these topics. So that's a very, very good place to begin. I also think that taking your time and sort of exploring, like we've already been saying, like listen to what people are saying online, figure out what books people are reading in terms of alternative relationships and polyamorous relationships. But also, because I love nonfiction and I know a lot of people hate it, I would like to recommend 2 nonfiction books that I think will help you to sort of deconstruct ideas that you have about normative relationships, because I feel like it is very easy for us to have ideas of what love is or how relationships of any kind should work that are very, very, very deeply rooted in patriarchal, racist, heteronormative norms that we might not even recognize. And I have two books on that topic. The first is All About Love by Bell Hooks, which is a pretty heteronormative book, I will say, but there are really explosive moments also in that book where she really tears apart the like basic form of relationships and really gets into the core of it. And so I do think it's still a very, very good book to start with in terms of deconstructing your idea of what love is, how love works. And you can use it for your fictional work, but also sometimes it might be good if you're thinking about your own relationships in life and you're like, oh my God, this is so relatable. So it might be a double whammy. And the second book is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. This is a collection of essays about a whole bunch of different topics, but I always suggest it because she too has some really, really deep and interesting takes on relationships. She was also a lesbian, so it is less heteronormative than Bell Hooks. But yes, those are two books that I would recommend just for starting to deconstruct how you, and that maybe deconstruct is not the right word, I guess, to recontextualize.
Explore,
recontextualize.
recontextualized.
Yeah, how you view relationships and love in general. They're also just really good reads. They're really fun. You'll learn a lot.
Definitely putting those on my list. I'm always up for new books, and I read voraciously.
All read Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is amazing. Fully just echoing everything that Aisha just said. Something that I think that you said that was really poignant is immersing yourself in the communities that you want to write within. And that's something that came up for me in my writing journey very early on. I began writing my first published novel, Tarnished Are the Stars, which has an asexual main character. And I was mostly in traditional publishing spaces, which often ignore indie publishing. And in my experience was, and actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Aisha, but I think our books came out like very similar times, our first books.
Was it
I think the Black Veins, I think we were within a couple months of each other, I think.
Oh my God, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. And I just remember people in the traditional publishing space were saying things like, wow, are you the first person with an asexual main character in your book? And I was like, no, what are you talking about? But there is this mentality, especially within traditional publishing, that only books that are traditionally published count in some weird version of reality. And so
a lot of times they're the only ones that qualify for certain awards. Sorry,
yes,
just
exactly.
from a publishing point of view.
Correct. And like, I say this as someone who is traditionally published, so I'm recognizing that I'm coming at this from a different place. But I found the most welcoming, generous, supportive community within the indie spaces for ACE representation. And within traditional publishing, I found mostly teach us how to do this, teach us how to be. And within indie publishing, I found welcome, you are enough. And that I chose to go the route of traditional publishing, but it is indie authors who were writing asexual books before I did who inspired me and created the groundwork for me to be in that space. So I think it's really important when we're looking at, conversations of like immersing yourself in community, look beyond the books that are on the Barnes & Noble shelf. Look for the books that are in, smaller niche spaces that maybe aren't getting the kind of marketing push that you see. Look for those communities because they are the ones who are doing the work before that work reaches traditional markets. The work that I did in my first book is nothing new. It was asexuality 101, but it was all that I could get through the door because traditional publishing is, I would say, like 4 or 5 years behind indie publishing at all times when it comes to representation. So I would say that if you are looking to write in these certain spaces, even if you are looking to traditionally publish, the place to look first is in indie publishing, in indie books, because they are going to be doing the work in ways that traditional publishing will not allow writers to do well before anyone in traditional publishing is doing it. And they are the ones who are doing the hard work. They are doing it for less marketing, less visibility, and it is really admirable and worth supporting, I think. So that's something that I'll just say about that. The other piece of this puzzle that the thing that I think about sometimes is when you are considering that you want to write alternative relationships or anything that is something that might be new to you. My question to you is, do you want to write about this or do you want to publish about it? And I think that those are two very different questions.
Yeah.
If you want to publish about it, I think your responsibility is much higher because you are asking for readership. You're asking for respect from someone else. You're asking for someone to read your work and look at it either critically or from a place of learning. You are potentially someone's first encounter of that type of relationship or that type of identity. If you are writing versus publishing, if you're just writing, that's something that you can explore on your own. You can go through a journey of self-exploration without the expectation that someone is going to be looking over your shoulder. And I think both have a lot of value. It just depends on what you're aiming to do. And it's possible to choose to write something just to write it and then decide, yes, I want to publish this. And at that point, if you make that decision, then there's a greater conversation to be had about, okay, well, am I falling into any harmful tropes, things like that. And I think it's just important to be honest with yourself about what your intentions are with the work and take those intentions seriously, because there is a responsibility when you're looking at publishing something versus when you're looking at writing something for yourself. So it's a very different question to be asking yourself when you are thinking about things like this.
Yes, I always say, like, I write for me, I publish for you.
Yes.
Right? Like that's the writing aspect is for me to get my ideas out and my messages out and my voice out and write the story that I have in my head and all that kind of thing. But when I'm publishing it for the reader. I'm really looking at, okay, what do I want people to take away from this?
It has a higher standard to it that you're expected to acknowledge. And with publishing, like Rosie said, you could be someone's first encounter with that, and you want to make as much as possible that to be not interfered with by harmful stereotypes or tropes, something that's a good, honest, clear experience that someone can take and learn from or explore further in their own life.
And
actually, I do think just coming from a science background, I have a science degree. One of the important things to know is use multiple sources. Please use multiple sources. Use a bunch of different things. Look at other books, look at personal accounts. There are a lot of podcasts out there, especially. And this is a good space I found, especially for people who are doing that groundwork, roots work, who don't have the kind of marketing push that come from traditional publishing or from having expertise like a doctor, where you can put that into like patients directly and they'll just run with it. People with personal experiences often go to things like podcasts or self-published books, and they can be harder to find. But with podcasts, I knew it can be a little easier if you just have a good podcaster and you can just put in like a search term and it'll pull up a bunch of stuff. Use a bunch of sources and look at a bunch of different people in the same relationship or trope, so that purposely look for the positive and the negative in anything you plan to use. Because if you go into it just looking broadly, like I purposely go and look for what is negative about, this, or what would be positive about this. Because if you have both of those and you can hold them in your head, it's a little easier than just trying to write it and then figure out later whether it was positive or negative, if that makes sense.
Yes, it's like dialectics, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Diana, did you have any final thoughts on that one?
I didn't. Aisha, were you going to say something, or have you lost it?
No, I remember. Thank you for reminding me. Sorry, sometimes I get goldfish brain. I believe we were talking about the responsibility that you have when publishing versus writing for yourself. And I think about that a lot, especially as someone who writes darker topics. So I debuted in the YA space with a fantasy comedy, which is very light, very fluffy. And now in my later work, I signed with my agent based on a horror novel, and everything I've written since has been more horror. But I always write about queer platonic relationships. I always write about queer characters. And so I often think about the responsibility I have, even though my readership has changed, to, yes, explore these stories and yes, have a lot of fun with darker topics, but also thinking about the responsibility I have with publishing. And this is why I feel so strongly about trigger warnings. I think that they're very important. And I think that sometimes, you know, if you want to explore something and perhaps it is a little bit on the darker side and you know that some people might not be up for it, but you know, some people are, that's where trigger warnings come in handy. I think in those scenarios, if you have a story, you think that it's something that should be published, you are not going out with the intention to harm anybody, and you have something that you just want to creatively explore, that is the time for trigger warnings, because that will give people the opportunity to decide whether or not this is something for them. I self-published The Black Veins, so I was super in charge of that, and I got to put trigger warnings over everything. And I'm hoping that as I move forward in traditional publishing, I'll be able to fight for trigger warnings in everything that I do.
Yeah.
I just feel like they're really important because it's sort of it's an agreement between you saying, listen, I understand what I'm writing about and I understand my responsibility. And it is the reader saying, okay, I thank you for telling me. And
I signed up for this.
Yes, exactly. And so in a way, you kind of enter a contract between you and the reader, because I feel like if I told you it was in this and then you read this and you're like, this is in there. And I'm like, I did tell you that. I did tell you that at the start. So I think, yes, there is a huge responsibility with publishing, and you always want to take that very seriously. But that doesn't always mean that you can't tell a story. Sometimes it means you have to tell that story responsibly. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. And I definitely agree. And I think it's also even more important if you are writing YA, because, you know, teenagers have different expectations, and there are a lot of like younger kids who are reading YA ahead of when they should be. And it's really good to make sure that there's some level of information that they can access so they know what they're getting into, and also to make sure that, you know, you're molding their brains, and that is a huge responsibility that you have to be aware of. All right, so we have some audience questions here, starting with a question from Saffron. When writing queer platonic relationships, where do you feel the line between queer platonic and romantic is?
I personally think that depends on the relationship. It's like, and depends on the characters in that relationship and like how they define it. Because, as in with real life, queer platonic is just how someone would describe a close relationship that isn't like sexual or romantic, but that could be any relationship, that, you know what I mean? That could be any like close relationship that's not like a parent or a child, or you know what I mean? So it just, I think it depends. That's my marks. I think it depends.
Yeah, I 110% agree. For me, it really depends on the character that I'm writing. Because, for instance, I think within the Black Veins cast specifically, I have one character who is very flirty, very romantic with everyone, just like us. He's a playboy character, but like he doesn't really mean anything by it, and it's really more of a platonic thing for him to just be super flirty and really complimenting everyone else in the cast. Versus another character who's like, if I say something like that to you, I mean it. You know what I mean? Like this is a romantic thing for me. And so I think for me, it really depends on, like you said, like the two characters that I'm writing about, their relationship. I don't really have a hard and fast rule, because even if I were to say, well, I think if things start getting like sexual, or like people really start like moving into like that side of the relationship, I would think that then it would be more romantic. But I can definitely think of some characters who wouldn't feel that way, or some characters who are asexual, so that doesn't even apply to them. And so I think it's just one of those things where it's like I look at all their relationships individually and just sort of make my mind up from there, and just see what they're vibing with and figure out how they want to label their relationship.
I'm not sure if this happens with you, Aisha, but like you said, like you write like a lot of horror and like gothic fiction. It's just like I think of like to like reinforce what kind of relationship it is. Like people use a lot of symbology and a lot of like descriptive language, and a lot of like comparing someone like, oh, like, you know, the relationship was like hot and heavy, like Hyacinth and Apollo, you know what I mean? Just like be extra with it, or else or it could be just it depends. It depends. Just be clear, I guess, when you're writing.
Yeah, I try to make it clear when writing how the characters are feeling about each other so that the reader can get a vibe that they're like, oh, this is like romantic for this character, or this is platonic. But I try to stay away from sort of things where it's like, oh, well, they held hands, so now obviously they're going to become romantically involved together. I don't really like doing things like that. And I remember I confused my agent with the book that I signed with her with, because she's like the two characters, Victor and Mina, she's like, they're so close. She's like, I thought they were gonna fall in love. And I was like, oh no, he's gay and she's a lesbian. They're like brother and sister. Like they love each other on a deep, deep platonic level, but that is never happening. And it was very fun. So yeah, I do think that sometimes it can be a little difficult for readers who aren't used to reading queer platonic relationships, but I do feel like they can catch up. They can get the gist of it as long as you're pretty clear in what you're writing. So.
And it gives a lot of space to explore what is romance, what is a platonic relationship, to really play around with that.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Sagan, is this idea of, saying, what is a queer platonic relationship? Well, I turn that around and I say, well, what is a romantic relationship? Because I don't know, and I'm not going to learn.
You're so right. I don't know.
I don't get it. I don't understand it, but, for sure. No, I'm joking, but I do want to mention that there is a difference, I think, and this is obviously like very, just like what everyone said, is that it depends on the character and it depends on the person. How you choose to define your relationship is really up to you. And I think this does go back to what we talked about at the very beginning, which is boundaries and having a conversation. There's a lot of different labels within the queer platonic umbrella, I would say. But something that I do want to bring up is the difference between a queer platonic relationship and a queer platonic partnership. And that those can be two different things. Obviously, they can kind of be conflated, but there are relationships where you will see characters make a conscious choice to enter into a partnership together, just like a romantic relationship eventually could become, an exclusive relationship where they are becoming partners in their lives. They're choosing to, integrate their lives together. And that's a different set of boundaries and conversation that happens. And so, you will see that. I think that often in queer platonic relationships, there is a amount of conversation that has to happen because we are refuting what society tells us is a normal relationship. We have to say, oh no, I don't want to kiss you. Oh, I don't want to go on dates. Do not bring me flowers. Things like that. Do not hold my hand. Certain conversations and boundaries that have to be set because of a expected norm, where those boundaries are often not set in a romantic relationship, even though I think that they should be. I think that when you're in a romantic relationship, you should say things like, yes, I like to receive gifts, or no, I don't like to hold hands in public, or I do like PDA, or I don't like to be called baby or your girlfriend or something. There's different conversations that you're going to see in these non-traditional relationship models because we are fighting against an expected norm. We have to essentially refute that, and there's this default that we are having to handle, whereas in a romantic relationship that default is often in line with what people want, and so they don't have the conversation. I still think they should, but I think that that's something that comes up a lot. And so when you are looking at defining a relationship in fiction, my first suggestion to you is, rather than defining it as queer platonic or as romantic, define it as, what do they want and what do they not want? And it's okay if it falls somewhere in between. There are so many different ways to have a relationship, and labeling them one or the other is a very binary way of looking at relationships, I think. There are so many things that someone could want in a relationship or could not want in a relationship, from any sort of, any sort of sexual, romantic, platonic, anything in there, that they could have those conversations and set boundaries. And I think that's really the important piece. And it just takes us right back to the beginning. So there we are, full circle.
Awesome. Sagan, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I think, everything that all of you have been saying is, completely nails it. Yeah. I think that it is really important to explore what this kind of means for you and to see where it takes you. Yeah. And to allow, I think also just allowing the characters the space to figure it out for themselves is another aspect that's really important. And anytime that we have these different definitions of things to sort of assess again, like why is it important to define it a particular way? Is it necessary to have one definition versus another? I've had a lot of fun with my books in, you know, some of the characters are much more like, oh, sure, it's, you know, this type of, like, it's, I'm polyamorous, when another character would be like, but is that polyamory or is it an open relationship? The other one's like, I don't care, like, why does it need to be a specific label, right? So kind of playing with how can we use labels and definitions to be helpful versus is it even necessary? Maybe we don't need it. And what happens then?
Actually,
what happens if we don't actually have that?
I just want to say to that, I find it interesting how characters use the labels themselves, because that tells you how they're thinking about their relationship. Yes. And those can lead into really interesting character conversations, because then the character's like, why are you using that term? What does that mean for you? Because, like, personally, as an autistic gray ace person, I don't tend to judge my relationships by like who I'm interested in having sex with. I will judge my relationship by the level of dependability. Like, can I call you at 2 a.m.? Will you come and pick me up if I need it? Like, that to me is more important than am I sleeping with you? And like, my characters play that out differently. I found that I started writing characters to play that out differently because I couldn't necessarily find it in real life.
Yeah, and playing with, because like we were having that conversation earlier about the privilege of different things, right? And like the way that we can kind of navigate, is a romantic partnership or a relationship any more valid than a platonic one? No, it's not, right? Like, they can both carry equal weight, and sort of playing with that. In I think it was my first novel in my series, I have this whole lead up where we see behind the scenes that like this one character is trying to like kind of figure things out, and she's like, okay, like I need to deal with this, like I'm going to have this conversation. And the whole time that like that entire scene seems as though she's thinking about going towards this person that she was interested in romantically and having the conversation with them and like making up with them basically. But the next scene, it's actually her making up with her best friend after they had a falling out. So the entire lead up to it is like you're thinking at first as the reader that like, oh yeah, it's all about the romantic relationship. And no, it's actually about the platonic relationship. That has been her biggest concern. That was the one that she was like, I need to fix this. I need to deal with this type of thing. So it really kind of elevates the value and the weight and the importance of platonic relationships as absolutely equal to a romantic relationship.
And it also makes the characters explore, what their values are in each one.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
That's
I think really considering like the idea that a romantic relationship is not more than a platonic relationship, it's just different. I think that's something really huge that I wish that we would focus on more. And honestly, I think it's why I gravitated so much towards anime as a kid, because so much of at least the anime that made it over here was about the power of friendship. And yes, there would be like romantic relationships, but it really was so often the power of friendship. I can do this because I have my team of friends behind me. And I think that's really powerful. And when defining these things, it's really important to consider that no relationship type is more important than another relationship type. It's just different ways of experiencing humanity and experiencing connection. Jade, any final thoughts? And then you should take the next audience question.
Sure. I don't have any final thoughts on that one. So the next audience question is, is this the one from Lily? I think? What are your thoughts on clarifying boundaries and making clear what the relationship is when you're writing in a time period where the modern language to describe these relationships doesn't exist. This is mainly about QPRs, but it could be applied more. I think it can be definitely applied more widely.
Oh boy,
Anyone
I
have
have
some
some
thoughts on
on that.
Please go ahead.
Yeah,
Please.
so I have a lot of thoughts on that because I have written a lot of historical or like pseudo historical fantasy. Actually, with my book Fire Becomes Her, there's a queer-platonic partnership in the story. That's spoilers, that's the end game. But I think that's like, who cares? That's fine to spoil that. And it's set in a 1920s inspired fantasy world. And the difference there is, I think, really key because it's not set in the 1920s. It is set in a fantasy world that is inspired by the 1920s. But when I set out to write the book, I made myself this weird promise that doesn't make any sense, and I ended up breaking later. But the promise that I made myself was I'm not going to use any sort of like technology or language or any of that stuff that wouldn't have existed then. And that quickly became I quickly realized that was stupid and that I shouldn't do that. But I did make myself that promise to start with. And I did essentially, like, with the queer-platonic partnership, at no point does anyone say this is a queer-platonic partnership. They define their boundaries, they talk about what they want, and then they ask for what they want. And they call it a partnership sometimes, but there is I think a deconstruction for the main character of what type of relationship she wants to be in, because she is in a romantic relationship at the beginning that is weighing on her a lot, that is causing her a lot of stress and anxiety because she is on the aromantic spectrum, and she's not handling that well, shall we say. She's dealing with that in a society that prioritizes romantic relationships, and she is finding that there is an imbalance within her relationship because in many ways what she is getting out of it is a class boost rather than
advantage.
It's giving her an advantage in a world that is kind of set out to not allow her into certain spaces.
I mean, didn't this happen up until the 1970s? Couldn't get credit cards anyway.
It's still, but we're dealing with that sort of thing, and so throughout the story she is consistently checking in with herself about what she wants, and she is a unreliable narrator about what she wants often. So we're seeing this kind of play out over the course of the whole book. It's not just in one scene, but we do see like discussions of what does that look like? What does she want? And then, an actual conversation about it multiple times. And I think that that's how I would go about dealing with that. If you're dealing with a time period where that language doesn't exist yet, just because the language doesn't exist doesn't mean the relationship doesn't exist. I would also look
true.
Yeah, there are also some really great books out there that handle, queerness within a historical context. One that I would point people to is The Reckless Kind by Carly Heath. It's a really fantastic book about it's a spec character with two gay best friends, and the three of them have this found family within a historical context of like a Scandinavian country. It's got horse racing, it's got theater, it's got everything.
I gotta read this.
It was fantastic,
literally.
Yeah, but it does model a queer-platonic relationship without ever using the language, and I think that does a really good job. I love that. So there's lots of content out there, I think, that does that, but it really is about talking about the relationship, setting boundaries rather than setting labels. And something I didn't say the last question that I think I'll say now is that I think for some people labels are an entry point for identity, and for other people labels are limiting. And so
because if you don't fit in one precisely, then you feel like you don't even belong with the label people.
and so what I would say is look at the story that you are writing and the relationship that you are writing and ask yourself, is this label liberating or is it limiting? Like what is it
help
doing for your
or is
story?
it hurting the story?
Yeah, exactly. So just look at like what is it that you want to say, and also even if the language doesn't exist, you are writing for a modern audience. Probably a lot of the language you're using in your story doesn't exist yet. If you're writing something set in like the medieval era, they're all speaking a totally different English than we speak now. So, think about that and consider, does this matter to you or does it not matter to you? Well, what do you want to put across? So that's my thought on that.
I would love to go next. I'm gunning to go next because this is something
Please go.
think about so often. So my first book was The Black Veins, like I said, which was a contemporary fantasy. So I got away with literally all my characters being like that Spider-Verse style introduction. Hey, this is me. These are my labels, because they're all teens raised on Tumblr. Like they know what they're talking about. They've had time to think about their identity and they have the whole list ready to go. And every book I have written after that has been set in an era where that was not possible. I've written a book set in the 19th century and I've written a book set in 1976. And both of those times I was like, I don't think they have readily available the exact same language we do to describe these sorts of relationships. And so I had this conundrum where I was like, well, how am I going to sort of convey like what's going on here? And I love poetry. I am a huge fan of poetry. And I realized that you can do a lot with language without ever saying explicitly what it is you're trying to say. So perhaps you never
So much.
Yes, like you can very easily play with a metaphor. You can play with dialogue. You can play with the intensity of the words you're using when you have one character describe.
I was reading some Sappho recently, so yes, absolutely.
Huge fan of Sappho. Huge fan of Sappho. Like I feel like if someone picked up Sappho with
The metaphors, man.
Yes, with no knowledge of who she was, they would pick through that book and they'd be like, I think this is a lesbian. Like, she never says the word lesbian, but you're like,
not once.
And I think you can really play with language in a really, really fun way where you never explicitly say what it is that you are trying to convey between two characters. But I think through a mix of having plot events and a mix of having characters be descriptive when talking about their relationships with others, their feelings that they feel for another, you can make it abundantly clear to the point where you might not ever say the words queer-platonic partner, but people will read this book and they'll look at the relationship between however many characters they are and they'll say, this looks and sounds and feels exactly like a queer-platonic relationship. Like you can make it feel like there is no other label that you could put onto that relationship than queer-platonic. And that's usually how I go about it. I try to make relationships feel like the label that I want to give them. I think I often now have started veering away from explicitly using labels because I love, like I said, I love poetic language. I love purple prose. And I get like I'm really excited and I have like a lot of fun sort of going through and trying to figure out, okay, how can I make people read this and be like, oh my gosh, they're gay.
I need to immediately read your books now.
I would just highly suggest just sort of having fun with language because it's a book. Language is your most powerful tool. You can use it to do whatever it is you want to do. They're your words. You can decide what you're saying and when, and just have fun with it. Be poetic, be dramatic if that's your thing, because that's my thing. I love poetic drama. So
Right.
I mean, Shakespeare invented words. I'm sure people were doing that before the ones that we started keeping track of. I wonder how many queer words have been lost simply because nobody wrote them down.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's fun if you said it in like a different time period. It's just sort of what you guys were alluding to. It's just like see how they talk about queerness. So like the modern audience can like sort of get it. Like of course with Sappho is pretty, it's pretty gay, but
very gay.
That's and that is like thousands of years old. But yeah, there were like terms or like allusions that people would use a lot. One I remember a lot was a lavender marriage. And that was like it sounds so nice, but like it's like, oh yeah, they have like an agreement, right? And or they have a lavender marriage.
Can you just explain that properly for anyone who isn't familiar with the term?
Sure. Like a lavender marriage is like this like a marriage between a man and a woman who are gay or bi, and they're in like a relationship with another married couple who are also gay or bi, and they have like this agreements that like that they're like a couple, like they're like mutual couples and everything like that. It's like a closed sort of like poly married relationship. It's fun, and at least that's one version I heard of, and also just like you said, like yeah, there might be lost terms, but it's just like it's fun to rediscover them and see how people like would use them. Like one term I heard was like sort of derogatory was called It's not a bad word. It's cabmite, which just means like kept lover, like a kept male younger lover. And it's just
Oh yeah.
and so just see how people write stuff down, and people are smart. Read
Don't be
it,
afraid to make your own words too.
right? Read
I
Oscar
mean-
Wilde. See how we.
Yes. Ooh,
Yeah,
that man was spicy.
Also, Lily, I know because you said that you are one of those people who has found freedom in labels in the chat. And I think that one of the things that can be really useful from a logistical side of things of writing a book is that if you find that you really want to use modern labels, then going back to the whole like writing for yourself and publishing for other people, use the labels in your story if that's easier for your brain to be able to write it that way. And then when you are, towards the editing process, take out the labels and see what happens.
You can always
right? So
edit around that later.
yeah. If it's a stumbling block for you, if it's a barrier for you being able to continue your story because you find so much freedom in labels and you really like using them, then just put them in at the time for the time being, and then take them out later on.
Does anyone else want to add to that, or Diana?
I don't feel like I have anything to add. That was all really well said. I really appreciate those thoughts. And really anything that I would have said would have been along the same lines, especially like fantasy. You can decide you're going to like stick with terms that are more like the time period, like what would be used in the time period that you're writing in, but it's kind of silly when you're writing fantasy to do that. Like there's no reason to put that restriction on yourself. You're writing in a world that might have dragons and magic. There's no reason for it to not also have current labels. If you personally feel like encountering that stuff in a fantasy story is something that throws you out of the world building, then you can make that decision for yourself, but there's no reason to do it other than that, and you shouldn't feel pressured to use language that is analogous to the time period that you're sort of basing your fantasy world building on.
Actually, I'm going to add one more thought to the end of that. As a person who kind of grew up in a very conservative Christian household until I went to university, I didn't actually encounter alternative terms for a while. And the first time I found one was a conlang term in a Mercedes Lackey novel.
Oh, wow.
And so I was actually able to start finding the concurrent terms by cross-referencing those.
Wow, that's so cool.
Tell me you're a nerd without saying you're a nerd. All right, our next audience question is from XM Moon. Let's see. With the careful depiction without explicitly labeling, do you have any advice for navigating the fun accusations of queer baiting and the pressure to detail every aspect of your own life, etc.? So sort of the pressure to basically out yourself, or to be more explicit with these character types.
I guess my advice was like do it exact opposite of what Supernatural did. That's a little bit mean. Okay, I'm sorry, but
there's some tea over here.
I could talk about that for years, but not today. But specifically, I wasn't even a Supernatural kid. It's just like I was just hearing like the pain my friends went through, and it's just like I'm like, I told you guys it was bad. Anyway, sorry. Specifically, it's just like making sure like you're avoiding like of course like it's like the basic like avoid like queer stereotypes or bad queer tropes, or like or if you run into like these queer tropes, like again like bury your gays, like figure out like why you want to approach the story that way, as opposed to like without like detracting from those characters' identities, I guess I'm trying to say. I'm currently writing a video essay on this. So like part of the reason that like everyone knows Brokeback Mountain, right? Okay. It's a two gay cowboys, one of them dies. Very sad. Very good. Like part of the
Classic tragedy.
It is, yeah, it's a tragedy. The author, the reason the author the author herself has said like she's run into like a lot of straight men who write essentially fan fiction about like those characters where like they get to live and they get to live on the ranch, everything like that. And she makes a point to say like the story is not even really about these two characters. It's about the systems that like cause them to not be able to have like a comfortable relationship in the first place. And so like, okay, if you're going to implement like a sort of like a problematic trope, you have to like figure out why you have to do it in the first place. Right. So I hope that helped at all. Also read Polysecure by Jessica Fern. It's like very helpful.
We're gonna have to collate these recommendations at some point.
I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but I think there's something to be said for how you populate the other characters in your book. I think it's very easy, and I don't necessarily think that this is like the way that it should be, but I do think that it is easy for someone to make an accusation of queer baiting in a story where there are no queer characters, but two characters appear to have a very close relationship and they go, they should have been gay or something. But if you populate your story with queerness and you populate your story with discussions of queerness, it is unlikely, I think, that those two characters who are having this close relationship would have that close relationship without having some discussion of what is it that we mean to each other or something along those lines. And I think that really it all comes down to let's have a conversation about it once again. But but I think that it is very possible to depict a close, queer platonic relationship within a story that is full of queer characters, to say that yes, this was on purpose. This isn't just me skirting the edges of queerness and being either unable to or afraid to, or there isn't a I didn't go there because of the market kind of a thing. This is no, I went this specific place on purpose. But I also think to an extent that people who are saying this is queer baiting about a story about queer platonic relationships, which is queer, are essentially full of it, and they need to go touch grass. It's one of those things where it's like, yes, queer baiting exists and it is a problem and we see it, supernatural. But I think within fiction, we see it a lot less than we see it on the screen, because queerness in fiction, as I would say, is more plentiful. And so I would just say that, the ways to...
I think fiction also has room to be a little more nuanced because you have a whole book, right?
Yes. Yes. And a book, lasts 5 hours, whereas a movie lasts 2. So, it just depends, I think, on what you're doing. Yeah, someone has said Good Omens is not queer baiting. Hot take. Absolutely, I agree. I think it's a queer platonic partnership.
Right,
but yeah, so it's definitely that I think is there, and there will be people who say that that's queer baiting, and there are people who will recognize that it's not. And I think that it depends on somebody's understanding of what queerness is. I think there's a lot of aphobia that goes into accusations of queer baiting when it comes to queer platonic relationships. But also I think just in general, platonic relationships, whether they are queer or not, I think are often devalued in favor of romantic relationships, whether they are queer or not. And that is across the board. It is not just within conversations of queer baiting. This is in, cis het allo books as well, or media. We see a prioritization of romantic relationships. And I really appreciate what you said, Sagan, earlier about the character who is really intent on mending this platonic relationship that she has. That's like, I love to see that sort of relationship, especially in a romance novel where a prioritization of a romantic relationship is expected. And like, I usually go into those books expecting that. That's not something that I'm not always anticipating that I'm going to see a really nuanced platonic relationship. So I really appreciate that. I think that's very, very cool. And I'd love to see that more. So I think in general, the conversations about queer baiting, I think, are incredibly valid. And I think that they are a result of what I would say is like a media-wide, like systemic issue around homophobia, rather than on an individual basis of one specific work. Unless it's supernatural, in which case, yes, it is about one specific work. But yeah, I think that in order to avoid accusations of queer baiting, we first have to like decide whether or not those accusations matter, and sometimes they do. But I think that really the way to avoid it is to have a conversation on the page where they talk about what they mean to each other and what their boundaries are and what their labels are, because then we have that more established. Obviously we can't always deal with the labels, but you can deal with the boundaries and the type of relationship that they want, their needs, their wants, what they're asking for. And I think that that's valid.
Yeah, I think all that is true. And I think also, looking at the question of, navigating accusations of queer baiting, I think it comes back even further to the question of why do I think that someone might accuse me of queer baiting? And would that be accurate at all, right? So for what purpose am I doing specific things in my story? Why am I doing one thing versus another? How might this be perceived? And how can I then, as we were saying earlier, with like getting sensitivity readers and that kind of thing, how can I ensure that I've sort of covered all of my bases so that I have approached this from a very respectful and thoughtful point of view? And, I think that this, to me, this is a slight tangent, and I promise I won't be long on this, but this is very similar to the concept of cancel culture, where I've been seeing a lot on social media where people are so scared of being canceled, when really the question is, why do I think that I would be canceled? And cancel culture isn't a real thing, because anyone who gets canceled never learns from it, always bounces back, they're fine, right? And so instead of asking that question of, how do I handle being canceled, it's why do I think that I would be canceled? Is it because because there's certain things that I'm communicating that maybe I need to kind of finesse it a little bit more? Is there a reason why I think that my work might be interpreted in such a way that it would be canceled or would be accused of this? So kind of like taking it back a little bit further might be helpful.
Is it a message? Is it a delivery thing?
Yeah.
I also want to mention that because you said that the pressure to detail every aspect of your own life, anyone who pressures you to come out or to say whether or not you are queer in defense of your work is wrong, period. You do not have to disclose anything about your identity or your sexuality or your romantic interests or anything for a stranger on the internet who is angry at you. That is never relevant. It's never relevant. Like, please, if someone is ever saying to you in any scenario, do you identify as this thing? Tell them go away. I truly tell them go away, because any person who understands the safety of being in the closet, who understands how important it is for some people for the literal safety of their life to not disclose those things, they will not ask you to do that. And also, I think we are entering a time where more and more people are understanding that expectation to have someone identify as for the sake of a fictional character or for a work is wrong blatantly. I'm not a Heartstopper Stanny, but my close friend is, and he told me about how one of the actors was outed, I think for being queer, because people were just very, very passionate about getting him to admit whether or not he was queer, and he was essentially forced to come out before he was ready. And there was a really, really big discussion around it. And so I think we are really entering an era where people are having more and more conversations about how it is not fair to expect such things from people. So I understand that fear. I definitely also felt it myself. I identified as bisexual for a really, really long time. And that label changed. And I was faced with this feeling of like, oh my God, like people know me as a bisexual author. And now I identify as a lesbian. Like I have to do this big coming out thing. And like, I wasn't ready to. And so I didn't. And I just put queer everywhere. And I was like, I'm still queer. And I was like, I'm just not quite ready to be more specific than that. And that is totally fine. That is your prerogative. Like, you can talk about however much about your life that you want to, but it can happen on your time. And anyone who tries to convince you that it shouldn't happen on your time is flat out wrong. You can send them to me and I'll yell at them for you. So
I'm
Yeah,
also looking at, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, like looking at it as, is it, like what I was saying earlier about the messaging and the communication aspect that I'm concerned about, that people might accuse me of it? Or, what Aisha was just saying, is it more of a, like, are there things like internally that I'm concerned about, like how people might be judging or viewing and things like that, right? So kind of understanding like what is the actual concern that I have, because then that can also help with sort of how you want to approach it. Is it something that in how other people will be responding to me? Is it the things that I'm sort of feeling about it and that kind of thing?
yes, I think it's always super, super important to interrogate those feelings, because that's really how you can solve the problem. Because sometimes it is an issue of, I feel like I'm not communicating well in my book, and that's a problem you can fix. Sometimes it is a feeling of like, I just feel like people are going to be assholes to me, and that's like a different thing where it's like, well, they're assholes, like
Yes.
don't worry about them. But yeah, no, I super agree with Sagan. Like, definitely yeah, question of dealing with bad feedback. Yes, yeah, I unfortunately I wouldn't worry about them. I do feel like we are entering a time period where more and more people are understanding that when people ask questions like that, it is in bad faith. And I think that is more and more becoming something that is very much like not tolerated in the queer community, especially. So yeah, I think that if something like that were to happen to you, you can trust that a lot of people would be like, hey, stop it. So you would be protected, is what I'm trying to say.
I also think that in terms of queer baiting, if that, we're talking about specifically queer baiting is using queer language, using queer coded relationships that are never then brought to any sort of conclusion, any fruition, for specifically to bring in a queer audience for monetary gain. That's what that's about. It's not queer baiting if you write a story about characters that are in a queer platonic relationship and say, this story is queer. That's not queer baiting, because they are queer, and you have expressed that through the book. You've talked about it in the marketing. That's there. I think that queer baiting, in my opinion, is something that happens specifically within the scope of a capitalistic endeavor. It is something that happens because a creator or a production company or something has decided that the queer community is worth profiting off of, but not worth representing. And so I don't think that if you are going into a story and writing a queer platonic partnership, that's not something that's happening. You're not saying, I'm going to bait the queers with this. You're saying, I'm writing something for my community. And if someone who is expecting a romance between two characters comes to that book expecting that, and then gets mad that that's not what it is, that's on them for entering your community space and expecting what their community usually provides. So I mean, I think it's the same thing with with anything where you're walking into a book with an expectation that you have brought along yourself versus an expectation that has been given to you by the marketing or by the author themselves. That's different. So I think that we see there are definitely lines that can be crossed there, but I think that anyone who's coming at you with accusations of queer baiting over a queer platonic partnership is doing so in bad faith, for sure.
Yeah,
I
similarly,
think those two questions are pretty vital to kind of defining that for yourself. So if you ever think you're on a line, you can ask yourself, am I taking money for this? Because there seems to be like a profitability aspect to that, and the other one is a malicious intention. And if you don't have either of those, I think you can discount those people.
Yeah, and I want to add to what Rosie said. The other thing that is definitely like in bad faith is people acting like queer baiting. Like, queer baiting is what happens within the story itself. If someone is trying to say you're queer baiting because you have a queer show and you have a straight actor in it or an actor who hasn't come out of the closet yet, that is messed up. That is a bad faith argument. Similarly, if someone's trying to say you're queer baiting because you have not come out of the closet and you've written a book about queer characters, that is a bad faith argument. That's not actually what queer baiting, the term, was created to talk about. That's not what it should be. Anyone arguing that it is already coming from a place of a deep misunderstanding. And
Real people cannot queer bait.
exactly.
Real people are people. They exist in the world as people to live their lives first and foremost, not to be representation for you. So
shocking information to some, but it is
yeah. Yeah.
real people are real people.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And
Right. Like you said, touch some grass, kids.
Grass, yes.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, this isn't exactly what the question was, but I do think it's important to make that distinction between characters who are written to be representation or characters who are written to be a specific identity versus real people who are writing books. Certainly can be role models, but they are not representation, and their choice to come out or not is about them and their lives. It's not about you and you being able to look up to them or you being able to claim them. Their choice to come out is something that's about them and certainly can have an impact on other people. We've seen this, with celebrities who come out, and then there's this role model to look up to. There's someone who is doing this thing in the spotlight that you can look at them and say, that's just like me. And that's really powerful, but it is not required. It is not, it's something that is about them and their decision. It's not about you and your life. So when an author is choosing to come out or not, it's about their comfort and their desire to share something with the world. It's not about you being able to claim them as, a representation or as a legitimate author of queerness. It's not about that. So I think that it really is becoming less of a thing. Like you all said, it's not as much of a requirement anymore. People are beginning to come around on that after especially some really unfortunate and I would say violent outings that have happened to authors. So hopefully we see less of that pressure. But yeah, it's always up to you what you want to disclose.
Yeah, and it's really it's not just about your internal comfortability, it's also about safety, especially in the States right now. There's a lot of ramping up of anti-queer sentiment, and there are a lot of places where anti-queer sentiment has just always been awful and never improved. And it's really important to acknowledge that. And I think that as things are getting more dangerous in the States, I think a lot of people in North America are sort of coming around to this understanding of, no, this is actually about the person's safety. And if I want this creator that I love to be safe, then pressuring them to come out is not it. And I hate that that's a place that people are making decisions from, but that is unfortunately the reality that we live in, and that's something that I think more people are becoming aware of. Jade, do you have any final thoughts? And then I don't think we have any more audience questions, so we can ask one more from our list.
All right, I do not have anything to add. I think everyone had wonderful thoughts, and I'm still digesting them. But I will ask the next question. So in romances, people usually expect a level of sexual tension that leads to sexual catharsis. How can we create relationship arcs where people have a similar level of emotional catharsis without that sexual aspect? Anyone want to jump in first?
I think about this a lot. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no. I mean, Heartstoppers did it, but again, Heartstoppers is directed at kids, right? So it's sort of like a YA, and so YA can do it all the time. So I'm sure you can translate that to adult stories without losing its adult edge, I guess, without losing things like that.
Yeah.
I think for me, it sort of stems from even just the very crux and the base of the story itself. So my stories, because they usually are so heavily wrapped around found family, I have built into the structure of my stories a sort of conflict between this person or this character who perhaps does not have a good relationship with their family or does not have a family. And you follow them through the emotional arc of them learning how to love and trust other people. And I think to do that, you simply have to let your story acknowledge the importance and the gravity of these relationships and let those relationships affect the plot in the same way that a more like traditional like romantic or sexual relationship would. So I feel like oftentimes in like more like heteronormative, like traditional rom-coms or like relationships, you have the two characters that like meet and they go through all these conflicts about them being together. And then the final time that they like kiss or like sleep together is like that big climax of like, oh my God, they're finally together now. And then for some reason it ends as if that is when relationships are over, when you start dating a person, which always confused me, never understood it.
Right? Same here. Oh my God. As an autistic person, I was like, and then what?
It bothers me so much, especially I think like for me personally, side note, I remember the first relationship I was in when I was in high school. I was dating my girlfriend and I was like, I have a girlfriend. What the hell am I supposed to do now? The movies didn't tell me about this part. But
Right?
yeah, so I think a lot about like allowing that same arc and allowing that same sort of emotional gravitas and emphasis to be placed on platonic relationships or on familial relationships or on those relationships that you want to focus on, which usually means allowing them space in the novel to explore their relationships together, to talk, to spend scenes together, instead of like perhaps if your story is like an adventure story, allow the friend to be the one who gets kidnapped and your main character has to save them, and there's like a lot of a sort of like emotional climax and like build up, and you can still sort of mirror those same sort of emotional beats, but they'll just have to look a little different. And I think it's definitely possible, and I always have a lot of fun trying to figure out what's the best way to translate like this traditional like emotional moment into like the stories I want to write. I always find that that's a lot of fun. So like I won't ruin that for you guys by telling you what to do. But I think, yeah, like spend some time like studying stories that you like and like seeing what the sort of traditional like save the cat like beat arcs are and seeing how you can reinvent them into something that resonates.
Oh, just save the cat?
Yeah.
Have you not found StoryGrid?
What?
StoryGrid.
Oh, go look up StoryGrid. Have fun with that. You might be lost for hours.
I will.
Or days.
I've never heard of this before.
But there's a video essay I like by this creator called Lily Orchard that she wrote. It was like totally not a shipping video, and she was talking about her frustration with like how a lot of romantic arcs just end with the characters getting together, as opposed to like she's like, that's just like part one. There's like living in together, getting married, having children, growing old. There's a whole like bunch of things that go on with like, you know, life. She's like, with my own life, she talk about her own wife, which is very sweet. She's like, with my own wife, we didn't just stop just because like when we were dating, that's just the beginning of our relationship. We like went on, and it's just
It's like chapter one.
Right. So just, you know, just see it as like a first stop in a long form arc. If you can't think past chapter one, you might need to rewrite. So yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, I completely agree with these. And you know, one of the things that I've had a lot of fun with in my next novel, Small Town Stilettos, that's coming out next month, is the main character has sex immediately with her love interests. And so that happens like very early on in the book, and the rest of the book is like the emotional aspect of them, like
how do we deal with what
things.
we just did?
Well, and actually, like, it's not even about the sex at all. Like, it just happens that she's just very open
But there's
sexually,
emotional component about it.
yeah. Well, actually, there's not really like that much emotional component about it. It's more about like the emotions around just like them connecting and like building the relationship over time and that kind of thing. So
that's what I mean.
yeah. So it's interesting to like flip things around like that, and yeah, like approaching it the same way, like getting that sort of emotional aspect the same way as we would with platonic relationships is another key factor. And I also like having in my novels, like, you know, some of them are meeting people for the first time. And, you know, another one of my characters has been with her spouse for many, many years. And then they get engaged while she's, you know, realizing that she actually identifies as polyamorous. And so their relationship and the types of things that they are working through emotionally are much different than her experience with, you know, another character that they're just starting their relationship, or with my other characters that are just, you know, beginning dating and that kind of thing. And so like looking at it from that standpoint of, you know, oh, they've been together for years and years, they live together. You know, her fiance, her husband is like taking care of his grandma, and you know, he's, you know, dealing with things around the house and stuff like that. Kind of like just like playing with all of those aspects where it's very much focused on the emotional types of things that people do deal with in sort of longer term relationships, and just like having the sexual aspect as almost like secondary, at least like the way that I like to do it, it's a secondary aspect. I'm much more interested when I'm writing my books about what are the themes and how is the sexual relationship, the sexual tension, the actual sex itself that's happening, how is that just simply a part of what those characters enjoy doing, or how does it sort of underscore the themes? I really like using their sexual relationships, the sexual tension, all that as simply ways to reinforce the specific themes that I like using in my books, which is kind of fun that it's like a secondary sort of piece.
Well, I mean, love and sex is a way of expression, so that would be a natural showing of the individual characters and how they relate to each other, and it's all going to be unique.
Yeah, my friend who's not ace, like like they made a joke that said, like, you know, we should have more like romance novels where like a one night stand is the meet cute, and like running into like your one night running into like your one night stand outside of like whatever is just like the rest of the story, and that made me laugh a lot, and now I can't stop thinking about it. I should mention I'm ace, but this is very funny. Like, this is very funny. Anyway, that's all.
Fair enough.
I would say that as far as like dealing with a story that may not have the kind of sexual tension that some readers are used to seeing, something that I like to think about is, rather than trying to build sexual tension, building relationship tension of some kind, and paying attention to specifically the things that make the character feel good and the things that make the character feel bad. Because in sexual tension, what we're experiencing is things that are making the character feel good are attention from that person, potentially touch, something that's happening that is creating the sexual tension. With a character who is ace, or characters who are not experiencing any sort of sexual relationship, we're dealing with a different kind of tension. So we might need to be looking at romantic tension, or we might need to be looking at platonic tension, or actually external tension. And so that's something that I like to look at a lot, is specifically what are things in the world that are either making the character feel good or feel bad. How do we chase the things that are making them feel good, and how do we address the things that are making them feel bad? So for example, not to just like, you know, use my work constantly, but in Fire Becomes Her, the main character is in a committed romantic relationship that she is feeling very trapped in. It is something that she has sought out for herself and then immediately gone, oh no, this was a mistake. And the things,
not what I wanted.
The things that are making her feel uncomfortable or feel bad are things like public displays of affection, people specifically calling out her relationship to this person as a qualifier for who she is. For basically, this relationship is the only
part of who you are
now. Relevant. Yeah. And so she's addressing that within herself of, I want to be my own person. I don't want this relationship to be what defines me or what gives me access to the world. I want to get that access myself, and this is making me uncomfortable. So the realization of the things that are making her uncomfortable, and then the acknowledgement of the relationships that she has that make her feel safe, and the realization ultimately that she wants to feel safe and not, you know, uncomfortable. So we can look at things like that as a way of developing tension with within even the character themselves, just in their own choices and what choices they're making that are good, positive choices for themselves or bad choices. So I just think that like paying attention specifically to what makes this character feel good, what makes them feel bad. And that is, I think, the case with really any sort of story about anything and any kind of relationship. It doesn't just have to be platonic. Within a romantic or sexual relationship, you're also looking at things like that. It's just through a slightly different lens. So that's my take on it.
Very
From a
cool.
developmental editing point of view, what I would just add to that is I love how you've highlighted that it doesn't necessarily have to come from, but we can look to other external sources to look for a driving value of tension. And within relationships, that doesn't have to be like, obviously romances are usually looking at connection, and we can choose to look at that from a different perspective, such as where we place those tension points. If we want to make, you know, sexual tension the climax, we don't have to do that. We can go smaller. We can look at lies, truth. We can look at reality, how much you're hiding. Masking within a relationship can be its own theme. Like, there are so many different places you can go for tension along that, but the important thing is to understand sort of the spectrum of where you want to go in a story. Find the lowest point, the highest point, a middle point, and something beyond where you actually go in the story that can be alluded to or threatened, quote unquote. That's a good way to find a way to lay out your story with escalating tension points without having to force a sexual situation that you don't want to place in the story, if that makes sense.
Right.
And a good source I found for figuring that out, this is StoryGrid.
Is that what you were mentioning earlier?
Yes, it is my editing Bible as a developmental editing person, and as an autistic person, I've never found something that breaks down story into like nice, easy, understandable chunks. Now, if you like the magic of story and you're not autistic, this might be like hell for you. So I will put that little caveat in there. But if you want to like totally analyze it, take it apart, put it on a bunch of Post-it notes and do whatever you want with it, this is the book for you.
The really funny thing is that I like heard a podcast that sort of talked about StoryGrid one time, and I told Jade about it, and I still haven't read the book, but now Jade knows everything about the StoryGrid.
Right. I'm also, like, I assume that I'm autistic. It's still impending, but right. Like, one book I really liked was called Wonder Book, but that Jeff Vandermeer, the person who made like Annihilation, the original short story, wrote many years ago. It's just like it showed like organic ways to like write stories as opposed to like just like the mechanical ways that like we're often taught about stories, and how to like to bend them and how to like organically tell a story, which has been super helpful.
Awesome. We are getting close to our time. I could talk to you lovely folks all day, but that is not the time that we have scheduled for, and I want to be respectful of everyone's schedules. So I'm gonna have everyone do a lightning round final question, and then just remind us who you are and what you write. And the final question is going to be, what do you love most about writing the types of alternative relationships that you tend to focus on?
I love
Found
helping.
family is cool. Sorry, found family is cool. It's great.
I really love helping readers see themselves. That's my favorite part.
Yes, I was about to agree. I was like, I think for me, it's the community aspect of having readers tell me that the book meant so much to them because it reflected something that they had not seen before or didn't even know could exist. And I think that is my absolute favorite part.
I think I would agree that that's like that would be my favorite part, but you all already said it, so I'm going to say something else just because my other favorite part is writing stories that feel natural to me. Writing stories about characters that feel easy for me to relate to. And I find that often with romance or like sexual relationships or whatnot, it is for me like kind of trying to shape myself around something that does not feel like it's the right shape. Like it's like trying to put on a pair of jeans that don't fit is what it feels like to me. Like like I can get them on, but they look weird. And so I really like to write stories like this because it feels safe, it feels comfortable, it feels like home, and that's a really just like nice experience.
Yeah, awesome. And I've shared all of your Twitters just because those were the easiest links for me to grab. That's where I know everyone from in the chat. But if you do want to shout out the titles of your books, and if you have separate websites, just let people know where those are. That would be great.
Yeah, so my book is The Black Veins. It came out in 2019. It's available pretty much everywhere books are sold online because it is self-published. So please do not go outside and try to find it. You will not. And I would absolutely love it if you could follow my newsletter where I talk about writing advice, the craft of storytelling, the lifestyle and mindset that'll help you get you through the industry. I do love interviews, and that would be lilithsmuse.substack.com. I will pop it into the little message here. And yeah, that's everything about me.
My short story, The Monster and the Itch, is still available for sale. It's self-pubbed, so you can mostly find it on Gumroad and Ichito, itich.io, which is like the same like the game website. And I also have the audiobook is also out. It's out on trying to find the link for it, but like the audiobook is out on Bandcamp, Gumroad, Ichito, and one other place I can't remember. I feel bad. Yes, it's so I'll send a link here, and I hope I can see you there.
I write the Polyamorous Passion series, so I've got 7 books out so far. They're available on all major ebook stores, and I'm publishing another book, Small Town Stilettos: A Modern Marriage of Convenience, next month. So you can check those out and get all the details at saganmorrow.com/books, or you can just like find that on my Twitter account. And then I also host the Indie Author Weekly podcast. So I share all of the behind the scenes of being a self-published author and the writing journey and navigating insecurities and all of the things about being an author in that podcast.
Yeah, I have also have books out on places. So I have Tarnished Are the Stars, which is now blurry, which came out in 2019. And Fire Becomes Her, which came out in 2022. And then I also just want to do a quick little shout out for an anthology that I'm in that comes out in October. It's called Being Ace. And it's an anthology of asexual stories across different genres. So that comes out in October. Yeah, you can find it online, offline, the weird space in between those two, I don't know. And you can follow me online. I'm mostly on Twitter, where the link is, but I'm also on Instagram at Rosie Thor as well.
Awesome. Jay, do you want to shout out your editing services?
Yeah, I broke my hand for a couple months, so I in the middle of reassessing all of my stuff, but my editing services can be found at eclipsewordsmithing.com, and I'm mostly hanging around on Instagram, same handle.
Awesome. And please do pop a link to that in the chat as well, just to make it easy for people. Jade is a fantastic editor. She's actually my editor, and I absolutely love working with her and cannot recommend her enough. And that brings us to wrapping up, but we still do have a few minutes. Does anyone want to share like one final piece of advice for writing alternative relationships?
Yeah, don't be scared. I think I was very nervous to explore relationships that really resonated with me. And it really was a sense of fear. I was really nervous. I was really scared. I didn't know if I was an authority, and I didn't know if I could. Don't be nervous. Don't be scared. Give it a go. I mean, there is nothing you can write that can't be edited or revised. I mean, once you publish it, it can't be. But I mean, until you get to that point, you can change things. You can improve them with feedback and work with sensitivity readers. And there's no harm in trying. So don't be scared. Go for it. Do it.
Yeah, and I would say, trust yourself, be true to yourself, just write from the heart. And I mean, yeah, like you were saying, you don't have to worry about how people are going to perceive it and that kind of thing. I mean, once you get to the publishing point, yes, you are going to be wanting to look at, am I communicating my ideas effectively and all of that sort of piece. But when you are in the early stages of writing, just write from the heart, just write your truth, whatever it may be, no matter how messy it might be and all of that. And then you can finesse it later on, but really starting with writing the types of stories that are true for you.
You got this.
Yeah.
I love how this turned into an encouragement corner. It's really cute. We're all just like, do it. Just do it.
We're all here to support all of you.
Don't be afraid to write in an in-between space. Like sometimes you don't fit in a label. Sometimes more than one label applies. Sometimes your label changes. And like that is part of being human and having a journey and discovering things about yourself. And honestly, like one of the things that I've loved most about writing is the fact that like I can't live every life, every permutation of every life and do every single thing or be with every person that I could see myself having a good life with. And books, writing stories gives me an opportunity to like explore all of those options that you just can't do in real life. Live 1,000 times, write books, read books.
Rosie, any final words of encouragement?
I feel like everyone covered it. I feel like I don't have anything else. Do it is really the answer here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our lovely panelists. It has been really great chatting with all of you, and I hope to have all of you on future panels someday. And thank you to everyone who participated. This was an experimental thing. A panel is somewhat longer than we usually do, and it's really heartening to see the turnout and to see the really great questions that we've had in the chat. I am so thrilled, and I look forward to doing more of these. And just gonna wrap up with our housekeeping notes again. Again, this was organized by the Weeknight Writers Group, which is a social enterprise devoted to providing affordable and accessible community and education supports for writers. We do lots of cool virtual events. We are looking at doing another writing roundtable that I do not have a date yet, but we will also be doing a bigger virtual conference on the subject of editing later this year. So I am going to leave our links
I'm so
in the
hyped,
chat.
guys.
And do subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on Ko-fi. Those are the best ways to keep in touch because Twitter is very, very sketchy these days with the algorithm, and I never know if it's actually going to show you my posts. And on the Ko-fi, you can also check out our membership program where we have lots of cool benefits that you can check out. And we are also doing this in partnership with Renaissance Press, which is a fantastic small Canadian publisher dedicated to publishing and supporting diverse voices. I'll leave a link to them as well in the chat. They're super great. Go check them out. Spend a bunch of money. You'll enjoy their books, I promise. And yeah, that wraps it up with 2 minutes to spare, which is impressive because I feel like we all definitely could have kept having this conversation for another 3 hours.
Yeah.